The first item under superintendent discussion items is a COVID-19 update. Obviously, due to the pandemic, things are changing daily in some cases, and at other times it feels like we're waiting for guidance from the state. So one of the things that the board has often asked for is to be kind of on the front lines of knowing what's happening, and some of this information is fresh from the county today. So I'm excited to be able to discuss them with you tonight. So the state actually is going to be using a framework that was created by NJASA, which is the New Jersey Association of School Administrators. It's my association. And the framework covers 6 areas. The areas are governance, wellness, instruction, facilities, technology, and curriculum. And I think because districts have gotten a little frustrated with the lack of information coming out at the state level, or sometimes there's 2 weeks with nothing, and then in 24 hours, there are 2 or 3 items of guidance. So as a state, we are being asked to create under these categories, the framework that I just mentioned, examples of things that we need that will be the district superintendents will be pushing back to the state rather than waiting for the state to provide guidance for us. We will actually be pushing information back to the state saying, we can handle this, we can handle this, we can handle this, but here's where we need your guidance and support. For example, under curriculum or perhaps under instruction, we might have to provide a detailed plan of that includes the needs of all students, how we'll be grading them, are there social emotional learning needs for children? For example, in governance, are there policies that may need to be amended so that we can do virtual schooling if that's how things turn out to be in September? So I would expect the spreadsheets from NJASA to come out probably tomorrow, and we're only going to have about a week's time to turn that around. The blessing is that Dr. McKay's district committee has already met twice. The district level committee is, I think, really essential. The state, by the way, is also looking at guidance from Missouri, Texas, Maryland, et cetera. The district committee looked at Missouri the other day. There are some options out there, which is beneficial because other states have started to open up already. And the 3 scenarios that we've discussed at our district reopening committee are kind of a virtual platform where we are now. Everything is online. A live platform back in school, which may be a stretch considering what's happened with COVID-19, or a hybrid, which would be a combination of a live in-person instruction as well as virtual instruction. Chuck's put out, I don't know, all the podcasts have covered the information on closing procedures. The principals have sent out guidance. I've sent out guidance as well to our families to let them know that the process that we'll be using for parents to start picking up belongings for children, that won't begin until June 1st. But our custodians are hard at work putting things into place to make sure that we are using appropriate social distancing measures, we're using appropriate sanitizing measures so that everything stays clean and that there's no contact. And all those details have been put out to our families, as well as our district committee is starting to focus now more on reopening procedures. And I'm pleased that we're headed in this direction because it's going to take probably every week that we have now from May all the way through August to figure out how we're going to reopen. And just like the state plan, we are discussing 3 options: a virtual, a hybrid, or in person. As you can expect, there are challenges to all 3 of these. And I did bring back to the county some key issues, particularly for Vernon because of our size. Some other districts don't face the challenges we face in transportation. In Sussex County, we do have some walking districts. Vernon clearly is not one of them. So transportation poses some real challenges for us. In fact, if we had to adhere to the current social distancing guidelines, we wouldn't be able to have more than 10 students on a bus adhering to the 6 feet apart. So some of the questions I had for the state was, will the state waive the 1 seat per student current requirement that we face? Would parents be permitted to drive children to school if they chose to do so? One of the other big issues for us, again, because we're so large, is masks and social distancing. In other schools, if they have 200 students, they may be able to purchase masks for every child and every staff member. In Vernon, with 3,000 students, you can see where I'm going. Things look a little bit different for a larger district than they do for smaller places. And my other questions to the state on masks and social distancing was, when will they be providing the guidance and what will it be? Planning for that poses probably the largest challenges for the fall. And that, of course, ties directly into scheduling, because if we can manage to get our students here on buses, how do we then schedule, half of our students in each building? The district committee is talking about everything from, flexible scheduling to abbreviated days to every other day to split sessions, virtual support, live support. There really are lots and lots and lots of discussions happening, not just with us, but all over the state, the country, and the world. And it looks different, kind of everywhere. What I will say is that the state is receptive to hearing from districts. So I'm working not just with the county, but with the region to try to make sure that Vernon is represented. I think it's really important that a district, not just of our size, but in our location, has a voice at the table, because I have to advocate for our students. I'm not saying that I don't care for the other children, but my job is to care for our children. So I'm working hard to bring the information back from the large committee that we have in district back to the state. The other things, I think the three primary concerns that I think we're looking at are curriculum and instruction. How do we teach? What does that look like? What does flex pedagogy or adaptive pedagogy look like for the fall? What are the enduring practices for our teachers? What works? The second one has to do with health, and this has to do with physical health, obviously, COVID-19 related health, as well as mental health. And the third one really is the schedule. What does it look like as far as whether it's a hybrid or whether it's something a little bit different. So Chuck, Steve, and I met today to start working on the CARES grant. So the CARES grant is money that the state has allocated to schools for COVID-19 aligned expenses. And I asked Steve if he could put together a spreadsheet, and I'd like for him to talk a little bit about allocations. And then I want Chuck to talk about instructional design, and I'll talk a little bit about trauma. And that will at least conclude the first portion of the COVID-19 update. So can I ask Steve to maybe share his screen, and then of course there'll be time for the board to ask questions.
Sure. Again, we did receive funding through the CARES Act. Our allocation for the district is $158,221. Let me share my screen if I may, so you can see we met today for the first time. The application was just made available. So we had a team of us get together to talk about the best way to allocate these funds. So if you can see here, these blended learning stipends, the total of those stipends is $44,847. So ultimately, those stipends, I'm sure Chuck can speak more specifically to this, but would be for teachers to be designated for this virtual learning.
All right, so let me inform those, Steve, since you started with those, but just so the board knows, there's $40,000 in health supplies that we're going to talk about in a minute, which are the key pieces to the health, and then there's mental health pieces that we want to talk about as well. What we're worried about with the curriculum, simply put, is the fact that when our students return, we believe that some of our students will remain online and will not return to the schools. So we've started to plan for that in a blended learning idea, in which we would have instructional people working during this time period, which is May 15th through September 1st, to prepare for both in-class learning, but also blended learning, which would be online learning as well. So we have a couple of people on our staff who are instructional specialists, because they have those certificates, online instructional certificates, and we're going to use them, as well as a person in each one of our buildings, to make sure that we cover the children who are not returning to school, the traditional school, but have remained online. And of course, we want all of our students to come back to school, but we also know the reality of the situation that we're in. This is coming directly out of our conferencing with teachers, as well as parents, and any concerns that people have about returning to school on September 1st. However, if the state decides not to return on September 1st, these same people would be making sure that we were ready to go with online learning throughout the fall. And also the concern might be that we would start with a regular school year and then have another outbreak and then have to quickly transition back to online learning. So instead of having people specifically do this process and spend their entire salary on it, what we would like to do is give stipends to certain people that we know that would be very good at this, and we will have to post and people will have to be interviewed, and then work with them in order to make sure that we are prepared for any of these possible situations or scenarios as we move forward. And again, this is all grant money. This would not be part of the budget. This is grant money that we would use in order to prepare.
Chuck, Joe Sweeney had a question.
Yeah, sorry, Joe.
Interrupt. I would just, you talked about students not returning. What about faculty?
Right. Okay. So this is the other piece, Joe. So there is that as well, and we would have to work through that. We have to work with the union. We'd have to work with everybody. We are concerned about all of that, and we're trying to make sure that each one of those scenarios is addressed. And the only way to do that is to make sure that there's one of these people in each one of the buildings. There is a group of people who are instructional specialists. Basically, it's called instructional design. There are a couple of people in our district who have master's degrees in it. A couple of people have certificates in it. We're going to use them as an overriding umbrella group. Then each school will have one person in there that's responsible for this. And we will make sure that the children are taken care of. If our faculty doesn't, if a couple of our faculty don't return, we may have to shift some of the work in their direction as well. We are looking for direction from the state, but as Karen said, our state is not giving us direction. So the only way to move this forward is to do what we're doing, not only on the district level committee and this grant money, but also Karen's voice. Karen's voice on the regional and state level has to be heard, because we are actually going to direct this about the way it's going to work. And the frustration that all administrators are feeling throughout the state is we're looking for direction of exactly what it's going to look like. And the answer is that no one has an answer and no one's really giving us direction. So we're trying to make sure that all of our bases are covered curriculum wise. And we're going to get onto this mental health wise. We're going to talk about that in a minute with that transition. And then of course, pure health issues as Steve looks at this budget. And I'll talk more about it. I don't want to hijack his whole discussion about the budget, but I did want to explain what we're trying to do.
I just want to cut in. I'm sorry. I just want to cut in. Matt, is the live stream up and running? I'm hearing that there's some issues with the live stream at the moment.
Yeah, it appears to be on now. I think it was out before, but quick,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to respond
Thank
and
you.
elaborate. I'm sorry, a little bit more on what Joe said. Pardon me. Some of the challenges, like you said, about teachers. Look, we recognize, and the district committee has really talked about people who maybe have a spouse who has an immune compromised situation at home, or they're caring for elderly parents, or children who may have immune systems at home that we're nervous about. We are trying to take into account all of those scenarios. I'm sure they're talking about it at the state level, but they really need to provide some guidance, and needs to be done sooner rather than later. For example, what will attendance policies look like in September at the state level? Will a parent be able to say, my child is exhibiting symptoms, I'm keeping them home and I'd like virtual instruction? Right now, there is very little leniency with attendance at the state level. It's quite strict, quite honestly, and that ties into a whole lot of other regulatory stuff. So those are the kind of things I think that we're really worried about from our level. The benefit is that I think the state is listening to districts that have now been set up not just by county but in regions, and we're trying to get as much of that information as quickly as possible. I'm really hoping that it comes out sooner than later, but we do have a voice in that. And you're right, Joe. I mean, the reality is that we don't know, and we do have to be flexible in that if we do have teachers who don't return, we have to be ready for that. The other thing that Chuck started to talk about were, I think it was $40,000 allocated toward PPEs and some of the protective, gear that our medical folks will need. The reality is that our nurses are on the front lines. Other than N95 masks and gloves and robes, we also have to consider where will children go.
Well, teachers are on the front lines too, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
they are. So we do have money allocated for additional PPEs, depending on the guidance. So again, one of the questions I asked at the state meeting this morning was, who's responsible for masks? Do people have to wear N95s, or can they just wear a face covering? So again, a lot of things that we don't know yet, and we need the guidance as soon as possible. So these are things that are evolving regularly, which is why the committee meets every week. But we'll provide COVID-19 updates at every board meeting so that you're aware of what's happening. Chuck, I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma, unless Steve, did you want to share more about the financial end of things?
Yeah, that's it. I just wanted to explain that first part of his budget. So he should go through some of the other parts.
Yeah, I think so.
You can certainly speak to it, but I'll keep this up. So this is ultimately the plan, the blended learning stipends. We would certainly have folks coming in the summer to work on the curriculum related to virtual learning. That would generate this savings in the general budget, because we did budget $13,000 for summer curriculum. Clearly, things would change now with the summer curriculum, and we would apply those funds from the grant and save it in the local budget. We would have health supplies allocated here, PPE, thermometers, temp sensors, etc. I would work with the nurses to establish a comprehensive list. Karen, if you want to speak to the trauma-informed coordinators.
Yeah, you know what, one of the things that I've been really concerned about through COVID-19, and I've said it, I don't know how many times, and we're starting to see it, that a lot of our children are starting to develop, increased anxiety and depression. Last year, one of our big initiatives was social emotional learning. I still believe very strongly that we have to continue in that regard. Trauma-informed schools are all over the country, and they've been happening for a long time. And usually when you're talking about a trauma-informed approach, it's usually as a response to ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. However, more and more they're seeing that children who have gone through something like this pandemic are starting to experience things similar to like a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. So I think it's really important that we look at some additional mental health support for the fall. If you'll notice, there are 5 trauma-informed coordinators on the spending plan for the CARES Act for the grant money, as well as a district trauma-informed coordinator. I do feel that every building needs to have one, and there does need to be a district-wide person to help coordinate those efforts, similar to the instructional design piece that Chuck talked about. These folks would be responsible for training. There are a number of outstanding certificated programs for a trauma-informed approach. There are also graduate level programs too. However, right now I do need to look and find the one that I think would be probably the most appropriate for the district. I will not be doing that on my own. I'll be working with some of our experts here in the district, and included in the district trauma-informed coordinator, I would also recommend somebody be an SEL screener. And an SEL screener would be one of the people who helps to work with some of our very young children who have a really hard time articulating when there are challenges. Sometimes they can't express, exactly how they're feeling. They would also be able to apply evidence-based interventions for students who need counseling, and it ties into our SEL curriculum, as well as RTI at all levels. And it actually complements the trauma-informed approach as well as suicide prevention. So when we look at post-COVID, all the things that are coming now is very early research, but one of the biggest predictions, the indicator, is an absolute increase in the need for mental health. And across the board, the additional needs are really essential. If you recall, we do have some money set aside now. Our regular budget for additional mental health services should we need them. This is more. But I think it's something that's absolutely essential. And I am going to speak about the regular budget in a moment, but I wanted to finish going through this. I wonder if Chuck could talk a little bit maybe about professional development, just so the board understands
Sure.
what that looks like.
Our concern also in the summertime is making sure that all of our folks know what we're dealing with when students return, not only mental health concerns, but also the idea of looking back and seeing where we are and benchmarking our students to make sure that we cover all the things that may have been missed while they were out for 12 weeks. So the professional development is going to be twofold. One, it's going to be for our staff to deal with some of the issues and some of the concerns that they have educationally. And it's also going to be for our teams as they start to look at online learning for those that are not returning, as well as making sure that our teachers are not double tasked with teaching a class every day or teaching their 5 classes every day, and then having to teach classes at night in order to make sure that they reach the students who are now learning from home. And again, this is all based on the assumption that certain folks are going to decide to keep their children home. And we need to be prepared for that so that that does not become a point of contention as we try to open up the buildings on September 1st, if we are allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
So we are preparing for this multifaceted approach to education next year. This will be a 1-year program. There are 1-year stipends based on the grant that we are receiving. This is not something that's permanent or will become part of a permanent culture. We're hoping that the 1 year is a transition year for all schools, and that the horizon looks completely different on May 15th of 2021 than it does today.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Chuck. The last thing I would say is that you'll see things in there like cleaning supplies and some of the PPEs. We really do hope that, if parents are feeling nervous, reluctant about sending their children back to school, and that may happen, that perhaps in September, if they are feeling uncomfortable or nervous, then as they see things happening in our schools, like well-supported instruction, like trauma-informed approaches to students, like a really well-done cleaning, sanitization, social distancing, and really healthy practices, that people will start to feel more comfortable in sending their children back to school. Because ultimately, we do want them here. I'd much prefer to be live, than to have a hybrid, but we have to be ready for anything at this point. It's the novel coronavirus. It's a new virus, and everything we're planning for is completely new. It's nothing that we've ever had to plan for before. So although this is a framework as to what it might look like, this plan will obviously evolve every month from now through September. When we open, and we have to adapt a little bit too, based on information that we receive from the state or from the CDC, or additional guidelines that have to do with some of the challenges that we're facing on COVID. So before I move on with a couple of other things, any questions, I guess, about the COVID-19 update and kind of the framework that we're looking at right now? I wouldn't call it a plan at this point because it's still being developed. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on if that's okay. I also wanted to mention a couple of things right before I go into the planning discussion. I wanted to thank Mr. Kepnes and the Board of Education. On April 30th, we approved our budget for the 2021 school year, and it really, budget season is a really challenging time for everyone. And I know everybody here at the board level, they spend an inordinate amount of time, volunteer hours, poring over the budget and really, really, really trying to get it right so that the district can provide what they need for our students moving into next year. That being said, although we had to make some difficult decisions, I think that we're providing a very comprehensive program as we go into the 2021 school year. We're preserving as many programs as possible for our children. And I also wanted to take the time to celebrate some innovative changes I think that we'll see in the fall. I'm pleased that at the middle school, we'll be utilizing a home version, the Glen Meadow Middle School Junior Viking Success Academy. That program will be addressing the needs of behavioral needs and academic needs of our students. And at the high school, we'll be using an individualized approach to assist our children and provide them what they need. Some of the children who are part of our ESS program in the past may qualify or fall into some of these categories, and some may not. The programs that we have are based on the skills and the expertise of our existing staff. I have absolute faith in our not only teachers, but our related service providers who can provide individual attention for the children that are in our district. And I know that there are transition plans happening right now for the children who were in the ESS programs and who may fall into a specialized program, an individualized program, or the Glen Meadow VSA Junior program. I know our case managers are working hard, as well as our supervisors and director for our special needs students, as well as our general ed educators, to make sure that those transitions go smoothly and that we meet the needs of those students on an individualized basis. I just thought it was really important to talk about that. And as we get a little further into the school year, we'll start to celebrate a little bit more what those programs will look like and how they will be beneficial in meeting the needs of every child in Vernon. I also wanted to thank Ms. Mitchell, one of our board members. I had the opportunity this afternoon to drive through Vernon. I did not get the chance to go to Mountain Creek. I heard there's a sign there, but if folks haven't had the chance to look, the senior signs are just beautiful. I got a little emotional with my daughter. We drove through and we were taking pictures of the high school seniors and saying, I know him or I know her. And it's a beautiful display for the class of 2020. Thank you for all your hard work. It is just spectacular to see a town come together. There's nowhere like Vernon. The pictures are made. Parents were stopped. They were practicing social distancing, but they were taking pictures of the signs. I saw some high school seniors there kind of posing next to the pictures. And it's become this like little thoroughfare where people are stopping and celebrating. And that's what we want them to do, not in violating any kind of social distancing guidelines, right? Not caravanning and not, calling celebrations together, but celebrating with their families. And it's just more than commendable. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think it's a beautiful celebration of our high school seniors. So job well done. Really something else.
Yeah, great work, Kelly. Kelly, do you want to, Kelly was so instrumental in making this happen, but I know you had a team of people that were working on it. Do you want to take a second to recognize some of the people that worked with you on it and make sure we give them credit for all their hard work?
Absolutely. Last night I was there until about 10:30 with Justine Van Blarkum, who her efforts are amazing. She has planted flowers all through town center. She has gone above and beyond anything that anybody could absolutely imagine. She has done. She is our idea fairy. Her energy is just so inspiring. And Hannah, who is Miss Vernon and also Justine's daughter, was out there until the wee hours. We were in the dark, and she was so happy to be putting up the signs. And then the seniors trickled in once they started to hear, and it was just a celebration of life. And it was just amazing. And I'm so grateful to have that experience with them. I also want to mention Dawn DiMartino, who did all the artwork and did all the signs, designing them. I don't know that people understand what goes into those signs, but we had to get permission. Mr. Labar was instrumental in that, getting permission for all those photos from from Lours, who is the photography for the yearbook, and Dr. McKay was instrumental in that as well, getting that approval so that we can take those photos and then give them to Mrs. DiMartino so that she could actually place them on each and every sign. Then she had to take all the names, make sure they were spelled correctly, put them all the graphics on, and then proof them to myself and to Justine. So it was a huge effort. Great team, and I'm so grateful to have spent time with them. It's just been amazing. So thank you, ladies. I couldn't have accomplished it without you. And it was just a celebration of life, and what better joy is that? So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Job well done, Kelly. The next item is a planning discussion. I'm going to keep it brief on my end and then, of course, open it up to the board. During the 18-19 school year, we did have as one of our, maybe it was just one of my goals. I don't know if it was a board goal or a superintendent's goal, but we did have one of our goals was strategic planning. And two different options were presented to the board at the time during the 18-19 school year. I think neither option was met with approval from the majority. So therefore, we did not embark on a strategic planning initiative with any one company or program. As we've talked about a multi-year budgeting approach, which I think, I'll credit to Mark, and I agree that we need to take a look at a multi-year budgeting cycle or a multi-year budgeting approach. We also need to take a look at some planning. So a couple of thoughts that I would share is that if we're looking at a multi-year budget plan, I think that we have to take a look at an analysis of the Taxpayer's Guide to Spending. That might be the first suggestion that I have for Chuck, Steve, and I to complete analysis of the Taxpayer's Guide to Spending, of course, in concert with the Board of Education. However, after analyzing that guide and seeing where we compare, right, how is Vernon doing in comparison to other districts when we look at the Taxpayer's Guide to Spending, I think we also need to embark on some goal setting that talk about our core values as a district. I'd feel very concerned if we as a committee were not looking at the core values of Vernon before doing anything else. And that's why I kind of mentioned strategic planning. I do know that many of the strategic planning options do look at core values. Honoring the voices of our parents and our children and our teachers and our community is really essential, especially now more than ever. Our parents are our partners in education. They always have been, but through COVID-19, they are in lockstep with what our teachers are doing, and we couldn't do it without them. So, if we're going to talk about planning, I think it's really essential that we talk about an analysis of the Taxpayer's Guide to Spending, a comparison, of course, to how we're doing in comparison to other like districts. And then I think we need to talk about core values. So if we're going to talk about core values and establishing some, vision, then the mission, the vision, and the core values should probably be looked at from kind of a bird's eye perspective. I do know that Steve reached out to New Jersey school boards to seek their most recent strategic planning option. We do have that to look at. We don't have to talk about it tonight. It's an option. We don't have to do that, but I do think the benefit of having an outside person assist us with strategic planning is that they're the objective person. If I do it, or if Chuck does it, or if Steve does it, I think sometimes there becomes we're almost too close to the problem to see it sometimes, and you need that bird's eye view. However, I certainly open the floor to discussion. We said we wanted to talk about planning immediately, so it was important that it was on the agenda. It is May, and it's the earliest we've had these discussions, but I think it's really, really essential as we look at the challenges we face in the next few years here in Vernon.
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly. I agree with everything you said there, Karen, that I do think, starting with core values or principles, or those things we're going to hold dear when we are going to have to make difficult decisions, right? I think that's going to be useful because there are going to be tough decisions over the years ahead, and having those principles be our compass in making those decisions is going to be important. I do also agree that external facilitation to help with that is good, because you and Chuck and Steve should be active participants, not facilitators in that type of exercise. Of course, my question then will also be, how are we going to fund that? So that would be my question, where we fund that from. But if done correctly, a good exercise like that should save multiples amount of what we spend on that exercise. So I agree. And also agree with, then there's the very tactical, where are we? I'll use the term of maybe a bit bloated. And I hate to use that term because right now it doesn't feel like we're bloated anywhere after the last 2 years. But what do we think are perhaps the more prime areas that we could at least do some initial investigating, do this sequentially with the exercise of making sure we do have our core values and principles in line when we make some of the even more difficult decisions that are going to be coming. So I agree with that approach. And I do think, although it feels like we just finished, which we did, it is time to start that.
I do have a question for the board on this, and I think this is a really great start to this conversation. But my question is, some of the strategic planning services that are provided either by outside consultants or New Jersey School Boards Association, while finances are a part of that, there are other parts of a strategic plan for a school district. So does the board want to go in the direction of a full strategic plan for the district, or do we strictly want to limit our efforts towards a financial plan? Just so we're all talking about the same process and what our goal here is.
Do they do like an audit of our practices, that group that we would be hiring? Is that what they do?
When we had the last one with the Adams study, it wasn't an audit, Ms. Mitchell. Instead, what happened was they set up committees for each one of the 5 priorities that they had, whether it was new initiatives, whether it was teaching and learning, whether it was finances, whether it was facilities. And then that person would be the chair of that group. And then they would get people from the community, people from the educational groupings, whether it was the teachers, the aides, the professional staff that helped out, assistants, administrators, etc., so that each group had representation. And then those people were charged with going out and finding from their folks how they felt about the issue that was at hand. Then they reported to the committee then reported to Adams. Adams then put the report together, and then we presented it. And the report had a couple of initiatives, but mostly it was looking at where we were heading and what kind of concerns we had with financial, health insurance, etc.
And Kelly, I can speak a little bit to the school board's plan. I wasn't here when I used it last. It was in my previous district. The way school board starts their plan is they invite the members of the community from the very beginning, and they start with the vision, and they talk about, if the Vernon Township School District were on a magazine cover, what would you want people to say about Vernon? What are the things you want people to say about Vernon if they were on the cover of a magazine or a feature of a television broadcast or something? And it starts with the vision from the perspective of the community, and then they break it into similar areas. And somebody might say, well, my vision is that we are, that we're saving money, that our taxes are low, right? So that might become one of the goals. Or our vision might be that, we maintain very high levels of academic rigor and performance at the high school through AP and, fine and performing arts, STEM, et cetera, right? So those things are generated from the community and from the people who come out and are part of the planning process. And then they help you create a strategic planning goals framework. Sorry, the lights keep going off in this office. And they end up, they create strategic planning goals frameworks with a map that basically takes you through a multi-year planning process. And what we did in my previous district was every agenda item on the board agendas, we actually tied it back to our strategic planning goals. So for example, when you were hiring, personnel, maybe if one of your goals was to maintain high quality personnel or high quality teaching, when you got to the personnel items, it would say strategic planning goal number 3, just to remind the board that you were including your strategic planning action items through all of your agendas. And I felt that it was a nice way to tie it back. And the model for me, and I know your question was specific. I think the last time we looked, Adams was, I want to say about $22,000. I think School boards, when Steve just looked at it this week, was about $4,000. There's a cost, like Mark said, right? I mean, these things cost money. And I'm not saying that we have to make a decision tonight, but I think it's important for us to start the conversation. As far as an audit goes, planning and goal setting doesn't usually encompass an audit. An audit sometimes is a look back or a look over, and the goal setting is a look forward, is the best way I can think to compare the two.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, I probably used the wrong language there. I was just wondering if they just like look at how we handle things on a whole and say, you know, these are the areas that I think that you can use improvement in.
Mhm.
And is that their mantra as far as that goes, or?
It was sort of self-building when we did the Adams 8 years ago, because it was based on the demographic study, and Brad can talk about this a little bit more, but Dr. Grip put together a demographic study, and it was really the overriding concern of the entire group of committees was we were losing students. And so therefore it sort of drove the vision of how do we build more student interest in our district. So a lot of it ended up being some of the things that you've now seen we've put into place, whether it was the programs at the high school, the brochures, reaching out to parents, doing podcasts, anything that we're doing. It was all about making sure that Vernon was seen in the best possible light. Although Dr. Grip's report on the demographic study was dead on with where we were going with our population.
Yeah. I mean, I think I love self-improvement, so I'm big into that. I would think that anywhere from $4,000 to $20,000, we can, you know, get that back by being more efficient in certain areas. So, I mean, I would be for an entire strategic plan, not just financial.
I will say this, that I wasn't on the board when we did the Adams study. I think it occurred the year after I got off the board the first time.
Right.
But I was involved with using school boards over at Northern Hills Academy. And from seeing the final product from Adams and from seeing the final product from school boards, you get what you pay for. The Adams, I feel, was a lot more comprehensive than what the school boards was. The Adams was community wide. I mean, there was some committees there that had in the teens of parents on them contributing. So I'm not advocating to spend the $22,000 or $24,000, but I think when you compare the two, there's definitely a difference between them.
What you'll find, I did one of the school board's strategic plans when I was at High Point. They did either a 4 or 5 year plan. And I've also did the Adams plan here in the district with Vernon. And to me, they were done similarly in terms of getting all stakeholders involved, get everybody in a room. Where do we want the vision to be? Where do we want the district to go? Pick our priorities, break up into teams, if you will, committees, and then ultimately develop your goals. The challenge that I've found in both situations is once that plan is memorialized, the board accepts the plan, you put it on the shelf. The hardest part is in year 2, 3, and 4 to keep that momentum going.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and especially now, I mean, part of it is that, you know, look, I mean, my experiences with school boards, which was a 5-year plan, but the reality is that we can't plan for 5 years right now. I mean, we're lucky if we can plan for 2. I think we could have planned for 2 years pre-COVID-19. Now with COVID, we'll be able to plan 2, but I got to tell you, year 2, we have no idea what that's going to look like, because this is having such a tremendous impact on what's happening. And, you know, maybe we've gotten, I don't want to say comfortable. We're whatever, 9 weeks into this. I don't even know anymore. 11 weeks.
9 weeks in.
Yeah. However many weeks we're into it. Yeah. We've gotten into this, you know, system, but, you know, we're talking additional state aid impact. You know, I'm hearing that at the end of August, we may have further reductions from the state because the, you know, state aid is based on income tax and sales tax. That's not happening right now. So anyway, you know, my point is that I guess my question in posing this or bringing it to your attention is that we wanted to start early. I wanted to honor the request of the board and say, let's keep this conversation going. I think that's really important. And, you know, whether we, I know Justin asked a question, he wants to get consensus from the board, and then maybe we take a look at some options and bring them back and start the conversation.
I think then that is more important to say what our core values are. So if we can really demonstrate what our core values are, regardless of what financial situation we're in, regardless of what health crisis situation we're in, if we can stick to those 3, 4, 5 core set of values, then we can develop a framework to prioritize funding, prioritize safety, prioritize our various core values. So I think that's essential. And then hopefully then the rest will sort of fall into place and help us frame how we deal with it.
I agree with
agree with
Michael there.
Mike.
The more ambiguous the
with Mike.
situation, the more you need the principals to rely on. So I definitely agree. Those that have done the Adams process before, how long did that take? What are we talking from start to finish?
There was an original meeting with Adams. He came up, he was from Florida. There was an original meeting with administrators in the district to basically see who would run the different committees. So they chose certain people to run committees, whether it was curriculum, facilities, finance, etc. They then talked about surveying the general public about the values and what were the concerns as well. And then they started to talk about how your committee had to be representative. So they charged you as the person who was running the committee to make sure that your committee was representative of the community. So doing curriculum, I wanted to make sure there was people in our community who are either teachers or administrators in other places, because I wanted to hear other voices, that type of thing. And then, you had to have goal setting for each one of those committees, and you had to keep in touch with Adam. So he would come online, this is early on, and we would have meetings in front of large screens in which the whole committee was there, and he would guide you through what the goal setting should be, and then how you were to report out. Overall, Mark, I would say the entire process took about 18 months before the report was ready to go before the board.
If we don't set our goals, all other planning is reactionary. So, I mean, you have to have your goals. That way we can go multi-year planning, multi-year finances. So I think it's essential.
Right. And the overriding concern 8 years ago, of course, was the significant loss in population that we were seeing.
Remember, Joe, there's board goals, there's district goals. So you have goals. The question is, do we want to revisit those maybe over the summer, late summer, tweak them, revise them, reapprove them, and then segue into a plan with some objective entity, whether it's Adams, whether it's school boards or somebody else, to, as Karen said, give us that bird's eye view so they're not deep into the weeds with us, and walk us through what we need to do to achieve those goals, including all the stakeholders. That's, to me, what we would want to do.
I think based on that time frame, though, you were either talking about two separate initiatives. To Justin's point, if this is 18 months beginning to end, we're going to need to do either a truncated version of this, or it's a dual process. We're doing the longer term, let's say, strategic plan, but then there's let's say maybe the financial crisis piece to this that we need to do in a much shorter time period. And what do we use to make the tough decisions in 6 months and 10 months, before this strategic plan is finished?
Right. The immediate.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like it would require two separate tracks. We're going to go into, as we go into the summer, the board goal setting process. During that period of time, I think we need to really talk about what our shared values are as a district, allow that to inform a multi-year financial plan, and then a separate issue, I think, will have to be the strategic plan, just because of the timeline and the turnaround on that. We can't wait 18 months. We're going to have a budget and a half done by then.
Agreed.
So does that train of thought seem to work with everybody? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Karen, do you have anything else on the planning discussion?
No, I just needed a little direction from the board and wanted to make sure that we had the conversation. I think it's something it's really important. I mean, we do have to start planning for the future. The budgets are still uphill for us for the next several years. I mean, we're losing a lot of money in state aid. I'm really proud of everything that Vernon has accomplished long before I got here. And I want to be able to preserve as much of that as possible. As the leader of the district, I think we've got a lot of great things happening. So I appreciate the feedback from the board. Thank you.
Justin, I would just ask in terms of that first track, where I'm saying the strategic plan is track 2, track 1 being the financial plan. Do we see that maybe being led full board, or would that be maybe the finance committee leading that, bringing it to the full board? How do we want to tackle that, or is that a further discussion?
That's a really good conversation to bring up. I think that we as a board need to have the conversation that we all have mentioned at this point of what the values are going to be that drive that financial plan and what our objective is, So can someone remind me when we typically start the board goal setting process for the next school year? Is it over the summer?
I think it's July. I think
Yeah, I think it's over the summer.
We can start it earlier, though.
Yeah, so maybe next month we need to begin to have that conversation on outlining, what our priorities are, what our values are, what our shared objectives are financially and in our decision making. And then from there, look at what committees we need to divert some of the work to
Right.
for developing that multi-year financial plan. Does that timeline work for everyone?
Mhm.
So having our initial conversation next month.
and incorporating it into the whole goal setting process, I think makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Can I continue?
Yes, item 1.
Recommendations, item 1, it is recommended that the board approve the following faculty, staff resignations, retirements, termination, leaves, transfers, assignment changes, appointments, stipends, salary adjustments, student teaching, mentoring as listed for the members of the board. The table begins at the bottom of page 2 and continues on to page 3.
Okay, can we have a motion for recommendation G1?
Chili to move.
Mr. Chili, second.
Part of second.
Mr. Sparta, questions or comments?
Just a discussion about the appointments. These are young people that are presently working for us in the school district who'll be working with Matt in the summertime. They will be part-time employees for 20 hours a week. That will change as the summer goes on. If it gets more intense, they may be working more hours in August. There's a lot to do, not only setting up the classrooms and making sure that they're ready to go with technology, but also there's a lot of repairs that have to be done on Chromebooks. We will not be collecting the students' Chromebooks, but we do have a bunch of Chromebooks and that need repairs as well. And of course, these young people will be doing that. And then also on the transfers, there is a mistake on the transfer. Anthony Galante is going from Lounsbury Hollow to Glen Meadow. It's not from Rolling Hills to Glen Meadow. And we made a change. Barb Munchauer is going to be teaching grade 4 math instead of grade 5. That was a last minute change. So I just wanted you to be aware of that and know that we're hiring our young people in order to do the technology work that they help us out with every day during the school year. So kudos to Matt and his team.
Hey, Chuck, will they be doing that at a school site or virtually?
That's what we're working out right now. We're working on trying to do that either. Obviously, some of the work has to be done in the schools. So we have to wait until we get the all clear from the cleaning and all the work that they're doing with the cleaning of the building. And then they would be working in the buildings, probably up at the high school where we do most of the repairs for the Chromebooks. But again, we have to make sure that the buildings are cleaned and then the students are okay with that.
And I guess there's a contingency plan if you don't get the green light early, maybe some
And
of that.
what happened is they would be working at home, although
Okay.
that's far harder to work out. And of course, we do have to, if we're going to open September, we do have to do this important process. After the rooms are completely cleaned and the floors are done and the tables are done and everything gets moved back into the classroom, you have to do this tech check of 300 and something classrooms throughout the district. in which you go in and make sure that the docking stations are working, the smart boards are working, everything's aligned. And also, Matt ordered new batteries for all the laptops that teachers have instead of ordering new laptops. And we saved a lot of money doing that. But all of that has to be done. So what has to happen is the teachers all have their laptops. At some point, they're going to get a phone call this summer from the IT team. They have to bring it to a certain spot, wherever that designated spot is. And then Matt's team will re-image the computers, put new batteries in them, and make sure that they're cleaned up and ready to go. All of this has to be, it's very labor intensive, all of this. And this is great experience for the young people. We just have to make sure that it's a safe place that they do it, but that's what would happen. But those are good questions, Mark. These are all the questions that we're dealing with of where to do and how to do.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, can we please have a roll call vote?
Yes. Mrs. Coughlin,
No.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Dr. Peak,
Yes.
Miss Pellet.
Oh, we lost her again.
I think we lost her. I'll put her down as absent. Mr. Sparta,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Mr. Annunziata,
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri,
Yes.
Mr. Tilley.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Recommendation G2.
It is recommended that the board approve the continuation of services provided by Progressive Steps NJ as an agency who will continue providing related services for the remainder of the 1920 school year to students who have recently aged out of the early intervention program and are now Vernon preschool students.
We have a motion for recommendation G2.
Chili to move.
Mr. Chili, second.
Second.
Sparta, second. Questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, can we please have a roll call vote?
Yes. Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
Dr. Peak,
Yes.
Miss Pellet,
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I have to abstain because I missed the whole conversation. So
There was no conversation.
I don't even know what we're voting on though, because I was trying to get my time.
It's okay.
Mr. Sparta,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Mr. Annunziata,
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri,
Yes.
Mr. Tilley,
Yes.
Mrs. Coughlin.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Mr. Vino, do you have anything else before we move on to item H?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item H, Mr. Kevnis.
Okay, in your packet, you'll see the personnel report. Nothing's changed. Your enrollment report is listed as well. And I was pleased, number 3, your HIB report is 0, but we will memorialize that. We will accept 0. Number 4, I was pleased the auditors did come back with a number of $62,500. As a reminder, the board suggested we do an RFP for auditing services. When I told the auditor we would be doing that, he asked if the board would consider renegotiating the contract. I did that, and they came back down from $80,000 to $62,500, which I was very pleased with. So I took the liberty of, to Justin's point at the beginning of this meeting, in your public meeting packet is a list of reappointments and contract reapprovals for professional services and different designations that Chuck has, Karen has, I have, district-wide for the year. So you'll see Nisavacha listed on that list for next week. Any questions on the auditor's proposal? Teachers Pension Service Agreement, and Karen, you can assist here. Let me just start it, kick it off. This is ultimately another vendor that wants to allow to participate in our 403B plan document, where these vendors, periodically, they would get our approval. They come into a cafeteria of the faculty. They sit, they make themselves available so the staff, the faculty can meet with them, talk about investments. And then we do those investments through payroll. This is a new vendor, but this vendor is associated with something called Teachers Coach. Teachers Coach is a service provided for professional development for teachers in all different areas. Teachers Coach, typically you pay for the service. Teachers Coach being a partner with Teachers Pension, if Teachers Pension is one of our vendors and we allow them to come in, talk to our teachers, and teachers can invest through them, the Teachers Coach service becomes free. So this is literally a win-win-win. It's a win for the teachers because it's another area to invest. It's a win for the board because we're getting free services. And then lastly, it's an opportunity for professional development for the teachers at no charge. So Karen, I don't know if you want to elaborate on the Teachers Coach services.
Just real quickly, I mean, Teacher Coach provides virtual online learning platforms for teachers. There's also a parent learning component. I don't believe that's part of this plan at this point, but that might be something, down the road. But the teacher portion includes everything from anxiety in the classroom, social emotional learning. There's actually a whole section on COVID-19 stress that was recently uploaded into Teacher Coach, which would be really beneficial to our teachers. But it also includes things like differentiated instruction and other approaches. There are even other modules in there that have to do with some of our mandates. We already have a service that provides for our mandates, but this gives another layer of professional development for teachers that they could use in the classroom, and it's at no cost to the district.
So then because there's a tax impact to the employee, it's a tax deferred investment when they invest in their 403B. I do want the board to approve adding the teacher pension group to our plan document. So you will see that as a formal approval next week at your public meeting. Any questions on the teacher's pension service agreement? Again, no cost to the board. Number 6, health benefits contract renewal. It is that time of year. Our health broker with Brown & Brown did look at the market, did come with competitive quotes with other carriers. I do have a meeting set up tomorrow afternoon with union representation and our broker. We'll do a Zoom meeting. I'd like to record that meeting. So we have it, and ultimately I would hand that over to the union for them to share it with members if they feel that's needed or appropriate. But are there any questions, comments on health benefits contract renewal? Number 7, reviewing your reappointment list. Again, this would be the last opportunity. It's a relatively large list of reappointments. In your packet, I always start at the April work session sharing that list because it's rather lengthy, give you the opportunity to mull it over. But again, next week, you'll see many designations, many reappointments. You'll approve your formal tax levy payment schedule. You'll approve your tuition rates for different programs if and when students happen to come to Vernon, whether it's special education, whether it's a general education student. So you'll do annual reappointments next week that would go into place starting July 1st for the 2021 school year. I did want to bring up number 8 one last time. I just wanted to reiterate an inconsistency that happened. I don't know if the board is fully aware of this. As a reminder, the board did approve to not reimburse parent contracts for time that they weren't transporting their children. In between that time, at the end of March, we did receive some vouchers from parents' contracts. It's like their invoice. They sign their voucher, they get it to the business office. And we did honor paying through the end of March on 8 out of the 14 contracts. So my question to the board is, do you want me to recoup the second half of March in a future payment by paying them slightly less, and I could spread that out? Or do we leave that alone and we ultimately amend that approval to begin April 1st? And if that were the case, I wouldn't recoup the second half of March. And to be equitable, I would pay those who didn't receive payment, which I believe is 4 out of 6. 2, the children were in a very bad state and were not driven. It'd be 4 out of 6. I would honor the second half of March payments to the balance of those parents.
Just to clarify, Steve, we voted on that in the April meeting?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure,
yeah.
I don't know if the board was clear on that some folks were paid through the end of March, even though the wording in the motion, which happened in April, I paid them prior to that. That wording said for as the time during this pandemic in which they didn't drive, which ultimately would have ended March 13th.
I don't know. I think we should pay through March, no?
I'm sorry, Jennifer, could you repeat that?
I think since the decision was made after, I think we should probably make them whole for March, no? For March. The
I
ones
think that
were
the cleanest solution is to make the cutoff March 31st or April 1st, because we took action after the fact, and there was a timing issue and a communication issue that occurred. I think that the easiest way to clean it up is to make the cutoff the end of March.
I agree with that. I would rather just even it out with the others and go to the end of March.
If it helps, I have some simple numbers here. The payment that we would have to recoup would be $8,700 in total. If you chose to not recoup that and we honored the balance of the other parents, it would be approximately $5,000 more. So that's ultimately what we're talking about.
And the 8,700 we've already distributed.
Yeah, we paid $8,700 for the second half of March, so we could recoup that, or we could not recoup it, in which case I would say to be equitable, we want to pay the others as well, which would be an additional $5,000.
So at the time we made the payment of the second half in March, we had guidance from the state that these contracts should be paid. Is that correct?
Well, unfortunately, that's a good question. Hence the issue. I can't place blame here. Part of me wants to point the finger at me, but the guidance was not clear. The guidance,
okay,
the
that's fine.
guidance it doesn't specify parental contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, it says pay your employees as though school was in session, and then it does reference contractors to pay them the fees for fixed costs and negotiate. It used fuel as an example as what not to pay. So if you want to know the truth, I was lumping the parent contracts in with transportation contractors at the end of March in my head.
I understand.
And it wasn't until April that I separated them out with the board looking into that issue.
But
I understand. I don't want you to go back and recoup what you pay, but I don't want you to pay the people that we don't have to pay. The people who sent the vouchers in sent vouchers in for services that it did not render. So, I mean, I know we paid them, but we shouldn't pay any more, in my opinion. So
Okay.
I don't support that.
I hear you. Okay.
My only problem with that is then we're rewarding people
Right.
for the vouchers in, and then those that didn't get
Yeah.
penalized. I mean, because of the dollar amounts and the situation was ambiguous, didn't clear up until after the fact. I'm okay making the cutoff April 1. So no payments beyond the March payments. We'd recoup anything after that, of course, but hopefully there wouldn't be any more payments.
Part of what I'm sorry, part of what I wanted to share was just that, remember, again, the state provided very nebulous guidance in regards to this. And that's unfortunate, but we're not the only district who's been through this. Everybody has been through a lot of challenges with who gets paid for what through the shutdown. So the initial guidance from the state was what Steve indicated, that everybody was lumped together. Bus contracts, parental contracts, and then guidance separated the two a little bit later on, which is how we ended up with some inconsistencies in our practice. My concern was I'm not sure if it was the intent of the board upon the last motion in April because it did read something like throughout the duration of the shutdown. But we took the vote in April, and some of these things occurred in March. So I think Steve's intent, of course, I don't want to speak for him, but I think the intent behind the discussion is really to make sure that we have some clear guidance, maybe from April 1 moving forward, and I'm sure we'll receive more guidance in September, depending on what happens with school being virtual or open. That still remains to be seen.
I still think that we didn't inform them because we hadn't made the decision yet until April. So we really, families kind of budget month to month, I hope. And I mean, I think we should honor our agreement for the month of March since the timing of our decision came after the end of March. So I don't know, I just feel like that's the right thing to do.
Does anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't think it's very fair to be recouping this money. I think it should be even across the board. We should, go until the end of March or April 1st, whenever usually the invoices come in. And then also to make sure that we're even, that we are not by any means treating some parents one way and other parents another. That's not a best practice by any means. So as long as we go towards the end of the month, and then from then on, we have all communication, just be clear. And that way everyone knows the exact scenario. That's what I would deal with.
I just have to say, and I don't mean to put a whole monkey wrench into this, but a couple of mistakes were made because of lack of guidance, and I understand that. But we do have to be people of our word. So I do think that we should pay until the end of March. However, there was a mishap with the AP as well. So, I mean, if we're discussing this and deciding that, then I think that we also need to circle back to the AP factor of those parents that weren't instructed properly. So I'm sorry, but I have to say that if we're going to talk about the transportation, then we do have to talk about the mishap with the AP.
I thought we addressed that though last month, didn't we?
I think we did. Yeah, I think they're completely separate discussions, and I think we did address it and thought that was, so we put that conversation to rest.
So we're making the AP parents pay back, even though they were instructed differently. Is that the plan?
I believe so. Correspondence went out from central office indicating that parents would be paying 50% of the AP registration costs for the AP tests.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are parameters that go along with that. I mean, we've already had some parents reach out submitting either the free and reduced lunch or Social Security information to Steve's office, indicating that due to financial hardship, that they are unable to do so. And we have to take into consideration that we would have appropriate treatment for folks falling into that category. And that's something that I think we discussed as well as a board.
Yep.
All righty.
All right, I missed that whole conversation. It must have been when I was absent with the budget. But I would just like to clarify again, I'm not involved in that combo. I'm coming in at the 11th hour. But I would just like to hope that all of our parents across the board are being treated equally, because I don't know this conversation and I'll follow up with it. But I'd like to make sure that our parents who are in special ed, we weren't going to recoup payment, and then to another set of parents we're not going to recoup. So let's make sure as a best practice that we treat all of our parents equitably and go forward in that manner, and all of our students. But I'll carry up, again, this conversation I was not a part of since I was absent. So I'll catch up and learn about it, but thank you.
Well, Teresa, we did have
meeting that you didn't have power, Teresa.
Right, but we did have that conversation. But why I'm just going back to the tying in piece is because we didn't have this conversation about these contracts. So we were either, like, to me, we're either going to stand by how we voted prior, or if we're going to open up, then I just don't understand why we wouldn't open up equitably.
So,
If we're circling back.
Kelly, my question, I guess, about the parent contracts was after the last, or maybe it was during the last board meeting, pardon me, we actually had a couple of people asking about the nature of the motion that was on the table, right? And it had to do with the recouping of the funds. When we took a look at that motion, like I said, that talks about the duration of the closure, I just wanted to be certain that the board voted on what they interpreted that to mean. If it's the duration of the closure, the last day we were in school was March 13th. On March 16th, the Vernon schools closed. On March 18th, the governor closed us, right, from March 18th through the end of the school year. So I guess my question was, the intent of the board under the last motion was to not pay for any time during the closure, which would include from March 16th all the way forward. Steve, interpreting that motion the same way I did, in corresponding with families, said, because we've already compensated you, we've already paid the reimbursement back to you, we can, decrease your reimbursements moving forward. And that was met with some concern from our community. So we just wanted to be certain that the board's intention was either to provide reimbursement from April 1 forward or truly from March 16th forward. So it was really just a clarification of the intent of the board, and wanted to be certain that we were acting on behalf of a motion that was voted on and doing so accurately as the people who carry out the desires of the board.
And somewhat of a timing issue, right? So, we made a decision in April retroactively, whereas the AP issue, there was a clear directive, albeit, several months before, and that lack of communication, it is and should be dealt with by the administration. But I think this is a little bit of a separate issue.
Yeah.
So I guess the reason that Stephen had it on for discussion was that depending on this discussion, we may be placing a motion on the agenda for next week that talks about clarifying the direction, or we may not based on this conversation. So that's really all that we placed it on the agenda for, just to fully understand the intent of the board based on the timing, like Dr. Peak said, and some of the conversation that happened last time.
I would be in favor of putting the motion on the agenda.
If I may, Karen, I'm going to contradict what you said. I apologize. I did take the liberty of putting an amended motion on to the public meeting.
Oh, on the draft?
Yes, I did. Yep. It's on there now. You can take a look at it. I can certainly remove it if this conversation leads to, that's why I wanted to bring it up. But I did.
You have, from my count, at least 5 members who will be looking at voting in favor of amending the motion to March 31st or April 1st.
No, I don't want anybody to think that I'm not for that. I am for that. But the other issue is now we're asking these AP parents to pay back money. And I just don't want to be in the position where we're asking parents to pay back money. So if we paid, for the transportation, we're not asking, of course, to pay that back, even though they were instructed that they were going to have to pay that back. And so now I feel that, we should revisit the payback for the AP. I just feel like there was a couple of miscommunications, which is fine. We're human, that happens. But I just feel that if we had a little glitch there, and then we had a glitch with the AP, we should probably just make it equitable.
I think they're two separate conversations. And I also think that just because you make a mistake or a glitch in one area doesn't mean you need to continue to correct it, or to do, I don't want to say correct it, but to address it, each one the same, because they're different. They're completely separate issues. So I guess if you want to have a conversation about the AP, we can, and you can ask to have that put on a work session agenda, Kelly, and we can talk about it separately, but I don't think that has any bearing on this conversation. I understand what you're getting at, but I think it's a separate conversation.
I understand too, Kelly. I go back to what Michael said. I feel like in the AP situation, it was a clear directive and it just was a administrative error. And I think in this case, we made a retroactive decision and it was a bit more ambiguous in terms of the term. So that's how I'm seeing the difference between the two. But I respect your position.
Yeah.
I think what also would have just helped for the board in general with this parent contract payment is to have some sort of updates of paperwork, something to really sit down and just look at and just say, okay, without obviously any personal identifiable information, like this is what we paid, this is what we would owe, like just breaking it down where we are now, what it would be versus March versus going forward, just in the future, and especially for this, just to really be able to look at it, because we're hearing numbers and there's all different ideas that are coming up. But just to be able to actually look at it and know and be able to delve into it just would have made this a little bit easier, because it's just trying to follow this conversation is getting a little difficult with the retroactive moving forward, this contract. So that would have been much more helpful just to be able to sit down and take a look. But
yeah, when I put my analysis together on potential savings, estimated savings due to this shutdown, one of the categories was transportation contracts, and a subcategory of that was your parental contracts for half of March, April, May, and June, because at the time, I think it was at your April work session, we didn't know how long we would be closed. So I did have lump sums, so there was no identifiable information, but other than just sharing you the full amount of potential, it was the 10% savings that we were talking about. Other than that, I wouldn't know what analysis to give to you, Teresa.
no, I mean, just like you said, some people were paid, some weren't, and just so we would have an idea, just to be able to look at, so we could like just make sure it evens out and we're treating our parents fairly. Because when parents do take on this role to drive their child to school for special needs, if I am correct, and I think I've mentioned this in the past, they have to take on a very large umbrella policy on their insurance. So they're holding up their end of the bargain, and that has to be made sure. So in case there's an accident or something happens, so if they're holding up their end of the bargain, I think that we should just be fair to them as well too. But no, Steve, I'm not sitting here saying you didn't do anything correctly on this. I'm just saying, just to be able for us to look at, just so as we sit here and discuss it, just visually, just would have been helpful, because it's like some parents were paid, some weren't. We want to go to this state, stop here. So, but that's it.
Okay, so the motion, the recommendation is on the agenda for next week currently in your draft, Steve. It does look like there's a majority that are in favor, so we can, are there any other comments that anybody has for this topic? Okay. Do you have anything else?
I'm sorry, Justin, I thought you would ask that. I apologize. Didn't mean to cut you off. I have two more items. One is really just to remind the board. We were looking at fund balance with finance. And in doing that, I wanted to remind the board, in wherever we land on June 30th at your June meeting, the June meeting is other than during your budget season, which we didn't do during budget, the June meeting is your last opportunity to potentially deposit any excess, what we anticipate to be excess funds, into your capital reserve account. So what I'll be doing between now and then is looking more critically at your excess fund balance, just so the board knows it will be significant because of this whole pandemic. There's a lot of areas that we're not spending money. For example, we're not paying substitutes. For example, transportation, lots of savings in there. For example, we're not buying supplies on the last quarter of the year that even though we may have a freeze, we always need things. And this time we really don't need anything. So there's a lot of savings. The balance in your capital reserve at this point is, come July 1, will be $474,000. $474,000. Since state aid is declining, we're losing the ability to budget projects to maintain the facilities. What we did during the 1920 year, as a reminder, the most expensive project was the rooftop unit on the high school of about $45,000. We spent about $9,000 changing out smoke detectors in Glen Meadow this past summer, which was the 1920 school year. With Matt Shea's tech project, to upgrade some of our IT infrastructure, to clean up some of our closets. We spent, I believe, $80,000 on that. Those all came out of your capital reserve account. For 2021, I'm not spending a dime from capital reserve, and other than maintaining, changing out filters, fixing things when they break, I don't have a single bona fide project online for the 2021 because of the budget crisis. So it's my suggestion, my opinion, my advice that we start to rebuild a capital reserve. It was a rolling 600,000. I think we need to get to a point where it's more than that because of the budget crisis. Again, my recommendation, my opinion, but something for you to think about going into your June meeting. Any questions on capital reserve? Lastly, I want to thank Jennifer Smith in my office.
I think
as a reminder, we have very early meeting. Dr. Beek?
I think Joe was trying to.
I have a point to make on the last topic. Finish up with Jennifer.
Finish up with Jennifer. Okay. She reminded me we have very early meetings, work session and public meeting in June, but we had them because they conflicted with other events going on that are no longer going on. So does anyone have a desire to revisit your June meeting schedule, or do you want to keep them the 3rd and then the 11th?
It might be beneficial to have a little more time for the CSA evaluation and meetings. I mean, I think we're still on schedule. I mean, we could always, if something happens, you know, we could always do a Zoom meeting, a special meeting for that, but that would be the only thing that I would think of to give board members more time to do the CSA evaluation.
Okay. The 3rd is a Wednesday. It's the first Wednesday in June. The 11th is the next Thursday. So if we did our regular schedule, and I don't know if the board wants to have these meetings before the end of the year or finish up just as the year ends, which is the 10th. If you don't care about that piece, it would normally be the 11th for the work session and the 18th for the public meeting, which might buy a little bit more time for the CSA evaluation. I wasn't thinking of that, so thank you, Dr. Peak, but just something to consider. If you like, I can bring it up again next week and we can vote to change the meetings or not, and that still gives us time to advertise if there's a change in meeting dates.
I'm good either way.
Yeah, I'm fine either way. So I'll leave it up to the members doing the evaluation.
Okay. Think about it, and I'll add it to as a brief conversation next week. No problem. Joe, question on capital reserve.
Yes. Did you have a number in mind that you wanted to put in there, or the total?
It's always suggested that we don't pick a fixed number because we don't know until the auditors go through what they do. We don't know the exact excess fund balance. My estimate was in the $3 million range, which puts you in a good place for the 21-22 school year. For the 22-23 school year, it develops a gap because that's such a large excess fund balance that behaves like a revenue for 21-22 that will likely not be there for 22-23.
Right.
So regardless, the language that I would always recommend for deposit into capital reserve isn't a fixed amount. It's an amount not to exceed. For we've done in the past, not to exceed 200,000. That way, if the auditors say, guys, you don't have any excess, well, then we don't put in up to 200. Maybe we put in 70,000. In this case, you could easily say not to exceed 500,000, we will have that as excess. And that way, when the auditors do their thing, we look at it and maybe we drop in 300, maybe we drop in 350, but we will not exceed 500. And that's just an example. I
You're
would
not
suggest
for a
not
specific
exceeding.
amount. You're not looking for a specific amount in the capital fund.
Oh, I see. No, I'm not gonna do that in one lump sum, but maybe over time we look at that. We look at next year with our declining state aid. If the state sticks to their plan and we lose 2.5 million and we're in a position to redeposit, then I'd start doing that on an annual basis. Because the more they decrease your state aid, the less ability you'll have to fix your buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, Justin, that's all I have, other than the recommendations.
Okay, so let's go on to recommendation 1.
Number 1, recommend the board approve professional development as listed in attachment WS4.
We have a motion for recommendation 1.
Chili to move?
Mr. Chili, second.
Sparta, second.
Sparta, questions or comments? Seeing none, can we please have a roll call vote?
Dr. Peak,
Yes.
Ms. Pellet,
Yes.
Mr. Sparta,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Mr. Annunziata,
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri,
Yes.
Mr. Chili,
Yes.
Mrs. Coughlin,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Number 2, it's recommended the board approve permitting the following student to continue in Vernon based on your policy 5111.
We have a motion for recommendation 2.
Chili to move?
Sparta, second.
Mr. Sparta, questions or comments? Seeing none, can we please have a roll call vote?
Okay. Mr. Sparta,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Ms. Pellet,
Yes.
Mr. Annunziata,
Yes.
Mrs. Bucieri,
Yes.
Mr. Chili,
Yes.
Mrs. Coughlin,
Yes.
Mrs. Mitchell,
Yes.
and Dr. Peak.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. Item I is public participation. If members of the public who are watching the live stream would like to submit comments to be read into the public record, they can do so at this time. Mr. Shea will provide us with the comments and I will read them into the record. Please include your name and section of town, and we will make sure to have your comments submitted to the public record. Just opening up the comments now. The first comment is from Kelly Brooks of Hidden Valley. Question for Mrs. Davino. It was brought up that ESS program has been canceled. Can you please explain why? What is the plan for replacement? Is there a transition plan? I would like to know the reason. I did not hear that. I don't think she said why, only that it is going and there will be a transition.
Right, certainly. We've had, we conducted an analysis of the ESS program that was done via the administration in the schools, and it spans a 2-year time frame. But some of the most concerning issues that we've had have been turnover with counselors or therapists in the ESS programs, both at Vernon Township High School and Glen Meadow Middle School. A continuous influx of new personnel creates difficulties with transitions and establishing clear procedures for our children. We've had a lack of collaboration and support between the ESS personnel and our teachers in the district. We've also dealt with some lack of a clear-cut exit plan for students from ESS. I don't mean the students, I mean the ESS facilitators. So there are no established goals to tackle in order to move students towards successfully graduating out of the program. It's also difficult to have students exit the program even when they're utilizing support services. For example, if a student checks in even once a week, they're not removed from the roster. There's no opportunity for a child to be utilizing part of the ESS services and part of the district services. It appears to be kind of an all-in or an all-out situation with the current model of ESS. The process to admit a student into the program is highly selective. We've had several occasions where students have been recommended to the program based on parental recommendation, district personnel recommendation, and there were open spots available. And those students were not accepted into the program. ESS can be very selective, and that provides some challenges for district personnel when we feel it's essential to provide services for certain children. And there are lots of students who could be serviced that are actually being taken care of by school counselors, school psychologists, social workers, principals, assistant principals, teachers, or other outside agencies, such as Perform Care. We've actually had some students, particularly at the high school, who really didn't want to enter the program this school year due to some negative connotations, perhaps through the student, that's from the student body. And we also had some challenges with the Glen Meadow program as well in that regard. So I apologize at the beginning of the meeting that I did provide some feedback for our community, but I did not state why. So I hope that helps Ms. Brooks answer some of those questions. And if you like, I'd be happy to follow up with a phone call tomorrow to give you maybe some more detailed information. I believe there are other questions, Mr. Annunziata, kind of revolving around the same concern, but certainly I know you need to read those into the record.
Yes, so I'll go on to the other comments, and if you've already addressed some of the questions, you don't have to revisit them, but you may have additional comments that you'd like to contribute after I read the other public comments into the record. So the next comment is from Gianna Maybe of Newton, which is an OOD, out of district. Travel from Newton for ESS program. What is the reason for dismissal of the program? They are trained to deal with all the new issues. It seems that with the COVID-19 issues, the ESS program will be utilized by many more students. This ESS program does many good things for the current students within the program. Are they going to match the trained personnel of ESS? Both the students and district benefit from the ESS program in life of the student and financially for the district.
So thank you, Ms. Maybe, for commenting. I did speak to some of this, but I certainly understand, the concerns that you have. One of the things I talked about earlier when we talked about the CARES Act is that we are looking to utilize some of that allocation toward some trauma-informed supports. And I do think that that's going to be necessary for lots of students this year. I hope, although it's certainly my expectation, that we are maintaining individualized supports for all of the children, either in ESS or children with IEPs or children in our general education setting. So I think some of your questions talked about matching the trained personnel of ESS. One of the other things I should elaborate on briefly is that at the April 30th budget meeting, although we talked about, pardon me, some changes to the model, we do have financial dollars set aside should we need to hire consultants to assist in some of the more higher level of care issues that we sometimes had to deal with ESS. That would speak to more of the mental health aspect of guiding, coaching, or supporting students. So I hope that helps answer some of your questions. Pardon me.
Thank you. The next comment is from Jessica Simeka of Glenwood, section of Vernon. My son is a freshman. He has been in the ESS program for the last 2 years. I don't understand why it is being canceled. And I know you addressed many of those questions or similar concerns with the previous two comments. The next comment is from Stevie Evers, Toboggan Trail. And that is, I don't want you to cancel ESS. And again, Ms. Davino was able to address some of the questions in the previous two comments.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to respond only because I know that Steve is one of our students, and particularly when we have a child reaching out, I think it's really important that, we make sure that we follow back. I can understand how you feel in not wanting to cancel ESS. My recommendation, of course, is to work through case managers and our specifically trained staff at the high school who can provide appropriate supports, not just for Stevie, but for all of our children. It's really important that we remember We have IEPs, we have individualized education plans for a reason, so that we can meet the needs of all of our students.
The next comment is from Vicky Smith, and that is, are only those who participate in teachers' pension eligible for teachers' coach?
No, that's a good question, Vicki. Thanks for asking it. Vicki obviously is one of our educators here in the district, one of our teachers. So you do not have to elect to be part of teachers' pension to get teachers' coach. Basically, the agreement is that as soon as the district agrees to accept teachers' pension as one of the investment firms for 403B type tax deductions out of teachers' paychecks, the entire district gets access to teachers coach. So I hope that answers your question.
The next comment is from Desiree Applegate of Cliffwood Lake. Many thanks to Ms. Davino and Kelly Mitchell for advocating for BTHS seniors to have a live graduation.
That was very nice. It's right now, just I think everybody knows that our plan is remaining to hold a live graduation. We've had to make some backup plans. The state keeps changing their guidance on that. However, we're going to do everything we can to try to provide a live graduation for our seniors. They really deserve it. And once again, a big shout out, of course, to Kelly, who did a tremendous job with the signs. We talked about that a little bit earlier in the meeting. Just beautiful job.
Okay, thank you. The next comment is from Sheila Nuzetti of Cliffwood Lake. A big thank you to Ms. Davino and the board for keeping hope alive for an in-person graduation for our graduating seniors.
As long as we can do things safely, we're going to continue with our plan. So everybody in the district is really excited about that opportunity. So if people maintain social distancing and stay safe, we certainly hope to bring that to you as soon as we can. So thank you.
Thank you to everybody who took the time to submit comments through the live stream. I believe that's all the comments that were submitted this evening. I know that this is not the preferred format for having public meetings. Obviously, we all would love to be in person, but we appreciate you being accommodating of some of the technical glitches that we have throughout our meeting, and for still participating and being a part of our school community. So thank you. After public participation, we have open board member forum. And I would just like to say before we go into open board member forum, as a reminder that we have an additional executive session that we will be adding at the end of the meeting. And that will be for the purpose of discussing contractual and personnel matters. And that action will not be taken when we conclude. But prior to that, we do have open board member forum.
I'd just like to comment on the reopening committee. I don't really want to go into everything that Karen, Steve, and Chuck went into earlier in the meeting. But I do just want to say that it's an honor really to sit in and listen to all of the great ideas and all the great concerns that everybody in our district, from teachers to staff to transportation to our health nurses, to our parents. We have parent involvement in this activity, athletics. So every facet of the district-wide reopening committee, I feel, is being represented. There are a lot of great ideas, great concerns. We're reading a lot of literature about how others are doing it. And so I think that the committee that Karen put together is really a good one, and hopefully we can make the transition to whatever September is the smoothest possible transition, with the central concern being the safety, welfare, mental health of our students. So it from the discussion that we had this past Tuesday on curriculum, we're trying to think about everything to try to make that transition back to school as smooth as possible. So thank you all for doing that, and thanks for letting us sit in on the committee to relay all of that information to the board.
Thank you, Mike.
Justin, if I could, I just want to, even though I'm a senior parent, I want to put my 2 cents in on this. I want the community, especially anybody who has a child in the school, understand what they have with Karen Davino. She is one of only 2 superintendents in the county who are willing, who was willing to go ahead and put forth an effort to have a live graduation. To me, that tells me she is only one of 2 superintendents in the county that put kids first. So while you may never, sometimes you may not disagree with the things that Karen does, there's one thing that's unwavering, and that is her wanting to put kids first and wanting to do right by the kids. And that should be commended.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Brad. I just, I was going to say the same things. Poor Mrs. Davino had to hear from me numerous times, very emotional phone calls. And she always takes my calls. She knows what I'm going to say and still always takes my calls. And to put children first, I mean, we have such a blessing in her. I can't commend her more. So thank you for saying that, Brad. I second it. It's amazing what she has done. And I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
I mean, I agree. I mean, recently, Ms. Davino just discussed why we discontinued ESS, why, that's what basically just came out of the budget so quickly. I mean, and now with wanting to put children first, I think that's absolutely perfect, because I think what we should do, just to make sure that all of our students are put first, and to make sure that the awesome services that we offer, that the whole program that we learned about, what was it, the Junior Viking Success Academy, is that it? Mm-hmm. That was all done in private, and I still to this day don't believe it should have been, because any program that our school district has is run by public tax dollars. And if we're creating a program or revitalizing one, then by all means, by putting our students first, what we should do is shout all of these wonderful programs from the rooftop. So what we should do is, at the public session next month, we should just have an overview of the whole program, what it's offering, and just let everybody know, so that way it can be clarified. Since we just learned about this being a behavioral academic program, but then being told it was an in-class resource, if we could all just get like a perfect, straightened out situation so we could all understand. And also what I want to let everybody know with, again, putting children's first, as the chairperson of special services and someone who's been in that field for 25 years and understands special ed really well, that what I want everybody to know for the board side is that when the Special Services Committee was asked to come and discuss a new program or a revitalized program, that the Special Services, as chair, I turned it down because it involved ESS. And ESS does not just cater to students in special ed. It caters to gen ed students, special ed students. And the program that was being put in place was also catering to gen ed students and special ed students. So that's why I said this is a full board discussion, and I asked for it to be put on the agenda. I didn't expect it to be considered private. But the other great thing about our programs when they're in public schools, what we can do is we can always open it up to other districts. And if our program meets another student's need and another district can't supply that program, we by all means can welcome in a student from another district, and that would be considered an out-of-district placement. And then our district would make tuition off of that. And vice versa. Some of our students go out to other public schools and vice versa. So for our program, what I think we should do is we should let everybody know the great program that we have. And that way, put the word out, let everybody know, let the parents know, let the teachers know, let all the students know that these programs are available. And that way, they all know it's there. And if perhaps they know someone in another district, it might fit. I think that's a great idea. And I think it would definitely be putting our students first. So thank you all. And so I would suggest that next month we put that on and we get a whole presentation and everyone can learn about the great new program. Thanks.
Thank you, Teresa. Do we have other board members with comments during open board member forum? Okay, seeing no additional comments, can we have a motion to enter executive session for the purposes of discussing contractual and personnel matters? Action will not be taken when we conclude, and we will adjourn immediately after concluding.
Chili to move.
Sparta second.
Mr. Sparta, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are in closed, and Matt, if you could turn us over from the